I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story, where I consult, teach, coach, and speak on the applied science and bewitchery of brand and business storytelling, so that you can clarify your story to amplify your impact and simplify your life.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
Can an accomplished brand storyteller move from promoting healthcare to selling donuts with a straight face? I know it seems like a bit of a stretch, but you'll learn on today's show that our guest is all about bringing joy to her customers' lives, whether through an inventive community health center promotion or planting a donut Easter egg in your Instagram feed. Yeah, I love donuts, and like my mom always told me, everything in moderation. Joining us is Kelley O'Brien, Director of Social Media at Krispy Kreme. When it comes to the brand's digital storytelling, believe me, there is no moderation to be found. They have a blast living into their brand story of bringing joy to their fans. Today, you'll learn about the power of the occasion and how Krispy Kreme uses moments in time to great effect in its storytelling. Kelley will demonstrate the power of visual storytelling, not only in how Krispy Kreme uses the sensory-based attributes of Instagram for its, pastry porn, but in how she characterizes her donut-producing shops as theaters and her vivid description of the parade of donuts as they're being made. Kelley shares how she amplifies her story reach through organic, earned, and paid media. Plus, you'll learn that donuts might not be as bad for you as, at least I thought. So grab a coffee, a glazed cruller, and let's put some chocolate ice custard filling in your digital storytelling right now with Kelley O'Brien. Kelley, did you bring any donuts with you to today's show?
If I could virtually do that, I totally would.
I mean, I can just sit here and taste it right now, that steaming Krispy Kreme in the morning with a cup of coffee. I mean, who can't? Talking about theater of the mind. But it's so great to have you here. And like I always like to start off with our guests. Kelley, you've been doing a ton of work in the social media world, and today we're going to hear about how you use storytelling online for Krispy Kreme. But before we get to that, can you take us back to a moment or a scene in your life that has shaped who you are today as the professional you are at Krispy Kreme?
Well, it was probably the first moment that I had a calling and someone had said, Kelley, this is exactly what you should be doing. And I'll tell you exactly where that was. In college, I was leading a German class. I was a drill instructor. I was also studying music, but German just happened to be something I'm really good at. And I had this guy in my class that said, you should be somehow involved in the media. And he got me to be a news reporter in college with a local station that also was an affiliate in Charlotte, North Carolina. And once I did that, I changed and added on communications to my major. And then I just was right there in the midst of learning digital marketing and digital communications. And it just started evolving after that. So that's kind of the pivot in my life of where that happened. Prior to that, though, I used to say I was going to be like a meteorologist, and I would practice telling people about the weather all the time as a child.
Oh, so you were making up stories since you were young on what the weather was going to be.
That's right. Using my own pretend technology.
And where did you go to school?
I went to Lenore Ryan University. It's in Hickory, North Carolina.
In Hickory, North Carolina. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I grew up right outside of Atlanta. And I will say, I guess my father gave me a computer to build. And I was like 9 and I built a computer. I'm really not that. I'm tech savvy in the fact I can use it, but I wouldn't say I'm necessarily a computer builder, but that was also another little key moment too.
Wow. What did your dad do that he would bring home a computer for you to build at 9 and think you'd get into it?
He was an engineer, a mechanical engineer. So he was building roller coasters and all kinds of things you could imagine. And he had gone up to Helen, Georgia, if you've ever been there. And someone had just given him like a box of computer parts and said, hey, here's some fun. And so my dad said, you're going to be the one person I know who'll be able to put this together. And I did. So it was a lot of fun from there. And I just said, all right, I'm going to see what I can do to create great things.
I think the only thing cooler than a rocket scientist is probably a roller coaster engineer.
I know. It's great.
So it was funny. You came up to me, a couple weeks ago. We were at Social Media Marketing World, and I'm so glad you did because your and my paths crossed back in Atlanta in 1999 or 2000, something like that.
Yeah, it was in the early 2000s.
Was early 2000, so maybe 2000, 2001. We had just recently launched a water conservation campaign here in Arizona, but we were expanding it throughout the country. And Georgia, Atlanta region invited us in to present what the campaign was all about and how they could get involved and basically co-brand it. And you were in that presentation the very first time I actually stepped my foot into Atlanta, especially on a business presentation like that.
I know. And I couldn't believe when I saw your name at the conference just a few weeks ago. I was like, no way, I got to share our stories and how we met. And it has been some time, of course, but I just remember it was so overwhelming, some of the details of some of the presentations and the videos and the material that was just so intricate in changing our world, especially there in Atlanta, that we were dealing with the tri-state water wars and had to deal with a lot of water conservation and stormwater pollution prevention issues. And I had been focusing a lot on stormwater pollution prevention as a public education campaign. And then that's whenever we had started talking about, we need to get into more water conservation. And so a lot of things that you and your team had developed were just perfect for us to use and take right off the shelf. And so I remember that very fondly.
That was fun. Atlanta, the whole Georgia area out there became a very powerful partner for many, many years. So that really helped launch the campaign up and down the East Coast. We went on to Washington, D.C., into North Carolina. They were very, very powerful in it. So great fun. And I was so happy you came up and introduced yourself again, because that had been a long time ago. And you reminded me of the Tri-State Water Wars. I mean, that just sounds like a fantastic book. You have to write the Tri-State Water Wars.
I know, definitely.
So Kelley, when did you go over to Krispy Kreme and how did you find yourself? What took you from the steps from water conservation into selling donuts?
Well, I'll give you a couple little milestones around the way. And I've been at Krispy Kreme for 7 years now. In May, it will be 7 years. But prior to that, I went to work on an account with an ad agency representing Syngenta. And that's where I used a lot of the knowledge I had from landscaping, lawn care, and things that I applied back in Atlanta, talking about the Clean Water Campaign and water conservation. And I plugged in all of that knowledge into creating all kinds of digital cool applications and email communications. And then I shifted to healthcare and worked for a healthcare system where I was tweeting surgeries and trying to use social media to the very extreme to help people to understand the types of services that a healthcare system had, and basically to really feel comfortable with some of the new technologies that were out there, from any kind of robotic surgery or any kind of thing that you can imagine that's to that spectrum. And some people at Krispy Kreme had seen a lot of the articles that were from major publishers such as Hootsuite and also the business journals in the area. And that had really picked up a lot of attention. And so I got recruited to come here, and they're like, so can you take some of those fun applications that you have and a lot of your theories and then apply that to a brand such as Krispy Kreme?
And when you talk about applications, can you go a little bit more in depth with that? Are these online tools?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. There were a lot of tools that I'd used for social listening and a lot of things of how do you use these platforms that were available even at that time to take to the next level, such as Hootsuite for just constant listening and finding out what was out there that would help us to be better, first of all, in healthcare, and listen to a lot of the conversations and concerns that people had about certain issues such as weight loss or infertility and things like that. And so I would basically listen and try to engage people with here's a solution for you, or here, did you know that in this service? So we created more of a medical tourism style approach to social media, and then also trying to do more of live or transcripting, not in the sense of live as in live video, but what can we do to show a day in the life of a world of a person's life changing? For instance, somebody that's had bariatric surgery, or someone that has had other surgeries that have modified their life, or again, somebody that's gone through a fertility process process. They're things that aren't necessarily the most glamorous parts of their lives, but they're things that they strive to be somebody different or strive to make change. And so basically, I would show how that we could connect people in new ways using principles of telling stories about healthcare, about certain physicians and certain practices, and kind of not making them so foreign to people that they may have to go and research or look through a WebMD or something like that, but instead giving real life practical changes in people's lives and more of testimonials and showing how their lives were enhanced by that. And so what I mean in those applications, in the sense of like, maybe it was a theory of, here's what I'm going to do to demonstrate a story to people to make them comfortable through, maybe it's a collage of photos or a time-lapse video to help capture, again, a transformation of a person's life, and taking those types of like doing something just a little bit different, because you could be pretty flat and static in healthcare, be more scholarly, or be more just, hey, let's make you feel better. But it's how do you really use a social platform or social learnings and looking at your success metrics to, again, bring like showing signs of change and really helping people to see the ROI of the different practices we were trying or the different things that we were experimenting with, of like tweeting a surgery. I think I was the second person in the history of the United States that had actually tweeted out a surgery, and showing the technology in itself, and then showing that closeness to a surgeon and asking all of the right questions that our fans had and followers had, and really engaging at new levels to kind of opening up behind the scenes of what happens in a surgery, because there's a lot of things you can think of and have anxiety over, or you may not know, what is this going to do to my body? And it allowed family members and friends to really engage too.
So how do you tweet a surgery? Are you taking pictures and then answering questions as they're coming in and kind of guiding them through the process?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. I did that. So it was like you would take photos of the surgeon, you take photos of the equipment. It's almost like a 360 perspective, and describing, and again, not using video because we were trying to do it more in segments, but we just felt like it would be a little bit more effective to ask and answer questions, because sometimes people are a little bit more timid, of course, to ask some of these very difficult questions, or it's harder to get them to understand some of the things that are happening. And so with putting them at a plain level field, that's just where we started. And the doctor would say, hey, this is what I'm about ready to do. And the surgeon would just start coaching, and his team would start telling me things too. And this patient had volunteered when he heard that I had an interest in, hey, let's display some of this robotic equipment. Why don't we take it to the next level of showing, rather than just doing like a showcase? Why don't we actually show a real life surgery? And so that was it. And I wore scrubs. I was just like any nurse that's coming in a sense, or a helper that's coming into the operating room, and basically was sitting right by his side the whole time.
What year was this? Because this has to have been really pioneering at the time.
Yeah, it was. So it was back in 2010, actually. So it was, it's been a little while.
And what was the surgery? What were they doing?
It was a prostate surgery. It was a cancer removal.
Oh, wow. Prostate. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's a pretty brave patient too. Sure, come on in. Shoot my prostate surgery. I mean, what do I got on me except a bad prostate?
Yeah, I know. It's quite the extreme, isn't it?
Well, yeah. So, and Krispy Kreme happens to come across this and say, hey, she would be perfect for pushing our donuts online.
No, it was kind of a compilation of many things. But I had made some relationships kind of prior to going to that healthcare system. And actually, I went on a little bit of a tour to go to Italy, and I wanted to take some time off to go to Italy. And I had a choice between Krispy Kreme and an opportunity that wasn't quite there, or go with a healthcare system for about a year and a half and do a lot of things that I would enjoy with social media only. Mm-hmm. And then a perfect position opened up at Krispy Kreme that was exactly with what I could do. And it's everything from enhancing websites, building them, project managing them, developing apps and project managing them. So I'm not necessarily, I have to be the coder, but I've just been so intimate into website development throughout my whole career, and any spectrum of digital marketing, email marketing, and everything from search engine optimization, everything else you could imagine. And social, of course, using that intimately through other parts of my career, and then focusing solely on it in a position. So yeah, that's kind of where right at the start of all the platforms, I was embracing it.
Yeah. I mean, since we met early 2000, so this was all just coming on. I literally think one of our very first websites we ever built was the Water Use It Wisely site, which is still up and running and going strong today. So you, as a professional practitioner, were growing up in the business as social media was coming too. You were taking some risks in healthcare. So, I mean, hats off to your leaders to let you do that. Did you ever have one of those really blow up on you before you made the move out?
No, actually, I will say the one thing that I learned kind of early going on, because I created the Clean Water campaign, and that was all about education, of course, of our public. And with that, I had to learn that, once you educate people, not just educating our public, but politicians back then, and then also whenever it comes then to the surgeries that I was doing, the healthcare system, all it was informing people and giving them kind of my perspective of what I was about to do and show the risks and show here's what the impact could be. And I think it's just setting the stage for here's what the opportunities are. Here's what our investment in time, money, and all resources is. And once that I saw like the wink of acceptance, of course, and everyone would just start telling us, this is exciting for us to try to do it. It was a small healthcare system. So because of it being just a little bit smaller, it was willing to take risk and it wanted to look much bigger than what it was and totally met its objectives and developed more of a medical tourism through social media. So it helped to really enhance things that, again, people weren't necessarily doing, connecting you with the right partners and the right providers that were states away and even a country away.
So you made the move. You left from healthcare into Krispy Kreme. Now, what was one of the first things that you felt like you had to overcome, or what were, maybe fix isn't even the right term, what were one of the first things you had to do to start amplifying how they were doing their social media and telling their story?
Well, I had to actually audit all of our channels. I mean, every single branded platform that we had, because the fact that there were things that fans had created on our behalf, and they were just kind of going along and creating their own memes, if you will, and creating their own personalities. And so basically going ahead and trying to take ownership and correcting some things that there was an agency that had been working on kind of acquiring our accounts, and they were posting here and there just a little bit modestly. They weren't actively engaging, but they knew the value of social. So there really weren't content calendars at the time. There weren't, again, the accounts all needed to just be cleaned up in the sense of like, how were we best representing each account? And then also establishing a voice and establishing kind of like here's what our full objective is, our strategy is just for social media in general, instead of just using it as an amplification tool or just using as hey, we should be here. And so it was basically fundamentally starting at the roots and the core and not necessarily erasing what we had done before, but just looking at, we look like we're a publishing catalog online, and how do we look like we're building communities, and how do we then start building the communities? And so practically grew every platform from zero to where we are today, reaching over 11 million people on Facebook and Instagram account that's close to 1 million as well, and then Twitter in the 300,000s. But then from there, learning and teaching our teams that real-time opportunities are very valuable and taking advantage of those. And we started using Deflategate, for instance. If you heard about what we did, and we were featured in Ad Week, Brand Week, and a lot of other people, because there was an opportunity to play with our inflated footballs or filled footballs and just have a lot of fun with it. And so we did ours are fully filled, #Deflategate.
Hey, anytime you can pick on Tom Brady and the Patriots, it's all right in my book. You won me over.
Well, we like to play kind of in the middle, and it's the fun middle that your mind can take you to another place and where we may not necessarily be making a jab at an individual. And it was just like the perfect little sweet spot right there to find that moment. And that post just went so viral.
Who was it? Reese's that did the interruption when the lights went out the Super Bowl and then they popped in and took advantage of that moment? Oreo, that's what it was. That's right. And they said, look, you could even dunk in the dark. That's right. So you maybe took a lead, or maybe they took a lead from you on that, but finding the right time to be very, very relevant and in there and having some fun with it. I'm literally on your Instagram account right now. And although people are going to be listening to this well after Easter, you guys own Easter, reframing an Easter egg into a donut, a Krispy Kreme donut egg, I guess.
That's right. Well, it's kind of like, if you think about our brand, and here is, I'll give you back a connection to healthcare in just a second. So I'll help you with how it's kind of enhancing a life. So you think about if in Krispy Kreme, and fundamentally it's a word of mouth brand. It's a brand that people have been thinking about, or since the very first day they experienced Krispy Kreme back in 1937. So it's an 80-year-old brand.
I mean, I was really surprised at that. I had no idea that it was that old.
Yeah, it was more of its expansion in the 2000s that really helped or in the 1990s, the late 1990s, that helped people to start experiencing the brand. But it had a very southern footprint in Georgia, and then in Alabama and South Carolina, North Carolina. But it was basically founded here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and people could smell the aroma in what's today known as Old Salem, and they would just start knocking on the door, and they would start talking about it, and people would wait out on the streets for these donuts. And they were only supposed to be sold at that time at grocery stores, but because of public demand, and they would just crave the hot, the smell of that hot donut, that there was a window cut, a hole cut in the side of the building there, and they just started serving donuts from out that window. It just took off what became the retail side of Krispy Kreme, back there in 1937. But our brand is just built on people sharing and experiencing it and occasions, and also, again, just making lives a little bit better. And so with that's where social just plays so well, because that's, again, how do you play off of a brand that's known for word of mouth, and then how do you take it to the next level of creating a way and a bond that people across different technologies or different experiences or going through drive-thrus can have that unique experience to them that's going to be unlike any other. And celebrate occasions. And sometimes there's the micro occasions of saying a thank you, or just being happy that someone's their friend. And so again, it's these moments in time, and whether it's the bigger occasions or the very unique occasions like the eclipse, or we play with the eclipse, or opportunities to play in sports, or anything that necessarily is just a moment in time where people are going to sit down together and share friendship, or share a thought or love, is just basically the times that we play and have fun, but it's authentic, and it's not like hunting for an occasion.
The power of the occasion. That's a very interesting approach. You had said something when you were putting your social together in your healthcare world. You did a heck of a lot of listening first and foremost, understanding what people cared about, what kind of stories were going to resonate, and really answering their questions. So utility and value above and beyond, before anything else, I suppose, was the driving force. Did you take that same kind of approach when you got to Krispy Kreme? And if so, what were your audiences telling you about that they wanted to hear? And maybe they didn't even know it. They didn't even know the stories that they were expecting coming out of you.
Well, it was exactly that. I did take the same principles of listening. And, I think before, and what some people do is they jump in and they have their own vision of what they want to say. And I've seen it a bunch of times from designers or creatives, that people just say, oh, this is the brand that I see, instead of listening to who the brand that it is. So basically, the conversations you would hear and see the thread of what people would say, it was a big base of love. It was first, people just wanted, all of a sudden, they wanted to say, I just love you, Krispy Kreme. I just love you. And so it was playing off of a stream of constant conversation of love. And so how do you harvest that and then also grow big fans from that, or people that become brand stewards? So as you would hear people just, say, I had the worst day ever. I don't know, I got a flat tire, but yet I wanted something to pick me up. So I went by Krispy Kreme and I saw the hot now sign, and I had this hot donut, and it erased my bad moment. And so then it was kind of, how do I create that virtually? Because you would listen to people say, you know what, I want to propose to my girlfriend, or I want to propose to whatever, to go to a prom proposal. And people would say, I've got this idea. I'm going to use donuts to do this, or I'm going to, come up with this. And people just publicly, of course, would just share whatever they wanted. And a lot of cases, though, they were using Krispy Kreme spelled many different ways. They weren't using @Krispy Kreme. They were either maybe using a hashtag, but in many instances, it was just the open uses of Krispy Kreme and various spellings. And so it's kind of training an audience too. I started watching as the things that people were saying, they weren't talking to us. So you had to start talking to them to get used to talking to us. And so it's like sometimes we would play trivia or create more of a people would just want to share. Like, I remember my grandmother gave me my first donut. Well, start talking to them about, well, what was that like? And what was the first donut? And, was it hot, or where were you? And so once you just basically start creating that relationship, it was all about building the relationships from that point forward. And from that influences content, and that influences how you talk to people. And you realize then these become the people you can test everything with, or test how your voice can be, or the products that you introduced, or what products you want to bring to life.
I'm on Twitter right now on your Krispy Kreme account, and I'm looking at a GIF of a little girl blowing what would be bubbles coming out, but they're not bubbles, they're donuts that are popping out. Fun little GIF. Are you producing
That's
these
right.
internally with your in-house staff, or do you have an agency working with? Or how do you do them? Because it's so much fun, but they're not always easy to do and pull off well.
That's right. Well, some of it is creating an evergreen library, to be honest, and we'll get people that are designers and help us do that. Sometimes we have a network of freelancers that'll help us too. And we have a few creatives internally, but it's a little small staff, just to be honest. And then we use some agency partners. So it's kind of a hybrid of all of those different partners together.
Interesting. So you're not going to one source, but you have a lot of different people with a lot of different takes on Krispy Kreme around the country, I would imagine, and also are hearing it, from a different maybe approach or sentimentality of Krispy Kreme in Arizona than what you might have back in Salem or North Carolina somewhere.
That's right, because some people, as you mentioned, like you didn't know that Krispy Kreme was even as big or global as it was, or maybe not even be aware of the hot sign or things like that. Because across the globe, in almost like 80% of the US all the shops have a hot now sign. You can't miss it. But if you reverse that then across the globe, because you're going to like Tesco's or you're at some of our smaller like tube shops, somewhere that it's like a quick grab and go, that people are actually experiencing our donuts just like in a little box. They're taking them off the shelf. They're not going into these theater style shops and they're not experiencing hot donuts. So their sensory is, I'm just all about the fact that this is a wonderful, delicious donut that has this incredible glaze, and it's the same glaze that's shared across the globe. So it's different too, because there's a language of, I mentioned love, and I mentioned a lot about how people express themselves with Krispy Kreme. It's amazing how it's so global as well, and that love just transcends no matter if you're in the Philippines or Russia or wherever you are. That is the same constant kind of conversation that people have. It's fun, celebrations, and then moments or trying to basically think about something different than the day that happened before them. In other cases, it's just like, I want to bring people along and we're going to have a donut run.
And how many countries are you in now?
We're in 34.
34 countries. So I remember when you came to Arizona, which is basically its own country. If you've ever spent any time out here, it's pretty crazy. Still the Wild West in every sense of the word. And I want to say this was probably, again, late 90s, early 2000s. And our creative director at the time showed up. He says, "Oh my God, have you tried these new Krispy Kreme donuts?" He was going on and on about them. I had never heard of them, didn't know what they were. And he brought in a box of them. And they were hot, and it was the glaze. And I mean, it was just the Krispy Kreme. And I remember eating that and going, "Oh my God, that is really like incredible." I could see how that'd be totally addicting. And it seemed like Krispy Kreme then over the course of the next 5 or 6 years grew and grew, and they were just everywhere out here. And then something happened. It just kind of imploded. And I know it seems like they had to close a whole lot of them, and you're down to just 3 of them in the valley. Now, is this just unique to Arizona, or did they have a growth challenge that they had to kind of shake out of?
Yeah, it's a growth challenge, but then it's kind of then how do you rethink and have smart growth where you can, we want to make sure we have high quality donuts and that you can have accessibility to them. But if you're not serving fresh donuts or you're not creating them in shop or you're not glazing them in shops, it's not the same experience. And so growing rapid fast was not necessarily in our best interest. And then when I came on board, it was after the decline of growth, and it was basically right at the turn of when we started growing again and rethinking about how the shops were. And, do you have more convenience plays and have drive-throughs and have other kinds of unique experiences that people can have your donuts at? We were at grocery stores, and a lot of people could get our donuts at grocery stores or get pies and things like that. But basically creating more of a fun theater style and unique experiences in those shops to drive more traffic. So we kind of grew, but we didn't, we grew so fast. And then it's like focusing on, well, what is the style of shop that we have, or what can we actually accommodate where we're still giving the freshest experience? So yeah, it was having to like scale back a bit and then grow smart.
So the typical thing, so you get successful and you grow fast and then lose a bit of control on the quality and the delivery, and that starts impacting the overall brand ethos, I would imagine. And so you got to prune it back a little bit, regroup. And then about the time you came on too, 7 years ago, it sounds like, is when they really started finding their pace with you in their work in social media and doing interesting storytelling. So everything was changing around them.
That's right. And they knew they needed to change and be positioned for the future. And that's one thing this brand, while it was relevant and it is relevant, but it's like how to be authentic to the brand and keep growing and keep staying top of mind fresh with people.
And you talk about the theater. Can you describe that a little bit more? When you're saying theater, are you talking about the actual customer experience within the store, the shop, or when they're opening up their hot box of Krispy Kremes?
Yeah, so it actually is in the shops. If you go into one of our, some of them they're called factory or producing shops, and you'll see there's a long like conveyor line, or we will say off the line, and you'll see like a parade of donuts that literally they start going down this conveyor and they go through a waterfall of glaze. And then that's where they're kind of showcased as they curl around or move around in that shop. And then they're boxed by hand with our team members. And then you are served one of those very fresh hot donuts literally right off of that line. And we have a viewing window that's like no other, where you get to actually watch as the donuts are being proofed and made and processed. And it's kind of like the full life cycle of a donut and watching that happen. So it's a really cool, again, way to kind of experience your product being made in front of you and watching it being glazed in front of you.
Folks, geez, did you hear what she just did to you there? I mean, this is fabulous storytelling. So these aren't just donuts on a conveyor. They're a parade of donuts. Can't you absolutely picture that? That's great storytelling. And then they don't just get glazed, but they go through a waterfall of glaze. And then they curl around the shop. So when you get delivered your hot, warm donut, you've been able to view this through the viewing window and seeing this theater in action. It's fabulous. I mean, it's just a wonderful way to look at what is otherwise a commoditized process. I mean, it's just making donuts, but you guys have made it so much more interesting and fun to watch, visual storytelling as you're experiencing it, but then delivering the goods when it's all said and done. A really delicious product.
That's right.
So that's good. Do you think you're natural at that when you are descriptive, or is it something that you had to learn? Because most people would not have described it like that. And I'm telling you, most of the storytellers I have on this program would not have described it like that. Do you all put in a lot of effort to teach yourself and your staff how to talk about Krispy Kremes and tell that story in a particular way?
I would say I watch and we talk to our team members about it, and there's variations of it, and there's a passion behind how we talk about our donuts. You'll find similarities in it, but it's not necessarily part of our training model. It's kind of in our DNA as being here. And the first thing when you come on board to Krispy Kreme is you learn how to make donuts. You spend about 2 or 3 days in shops. So in order really to be embraced, to embrace a product or to really experience it, it's one thing to consume it, but it's another to be like actually the heart and the hands behind it. So that's how you basically learn how to tell the story, because you're learning how to make it from scratch, and you're learning kind of the life of the brand while you're doing it.
Well, and it seems, too, from the research I did, getting ready for this, that storytelling has been in Krispy Kreme's DNA ever since its founding. It has a great story about just, what it was all about and how it grew. But in 2003, so a long time ago, 15 years ago, Krispy Kreme invested $1 million in the International Storytelling Center in Jonesboro, Tennessee. What was that about? And this is like storytelling investment long before storytelling was a thing or a buzzword like it is today.
Well, I would say just on the surface, we have deep roots in Tennessee and also, of course, all in the South. And I believe with that, it was part of basically how do we tell our story? Because if you think about Krispy Kreme, we've been a part of things like the World's Fair, introducing new donuts and new machinery and new equipment. And we're all about, we actually hand make all of our equipment that you see in shops. So I think as part of our brand, we've always wanted to put some of those unique technologies, and again, I'm going to say mechanics, all on display. And I think we've had such a story to tell that's where part of that investment was just that we wanted to give back to the community. But at the same time, it's, again, how do we capture our history? And we have a lot of people that are part of the roots of our founder that are still here employed by our company today, that they basically have that same passion. I actually sit in my office, have a pile of all of our history, and I have it in DVDs and everything else, and have built many timelines online. So it's kind of, I think we love history more than anything else, because without the history, you can't move on to the future, because because and sometimes you don't want to repeat the past, but you always want to make sure you're holding on to the past and spreading the whole core of who we are and how we became who we are. And we still do that today. And so I think it's just that storytelling, what we did then, especially even in 2003. And then we still do that in like every big major event that we have, from our franchisees to any other things that we do, is to try to tell that story.
Yeah, and this is about encouraging storytelling in education in particular. So is this something that dates back to Vernon Rudolph in 1933 when he first started it, or is education just something that the organization has embraced and is trying to push forward?
Well, back in the 1950s, Krispy Kreme created a fundraising program. And so as part of that, it was all centered around helping schools and helping them from bands or football teams or choirs. And so it's in the core of what Vernon saw as how do we, help our products to get out into the hands of more people, but help them with a cause. And so before there was, of course, long before crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, a lot of people struggle with how do I, how do I get my team, or how do I get whatever my school organization to be able to go and do the next thing that makes their lives better. And so we were just deeply rooted in schools, and we still are today. So that's part of it. Exactly it. And Vernon, just from what I understand, and again, I work with his son. And so it's pretty interesting to be able to talk about some of the things that he loved so intimately. And education was part of it. But I think it was just more of being part of the community. And that was, again, at the core of that.
So long before crowdfunding, Krispy Kreme was using donuts as an instrument for good. Sorry.
Definitely.
I couldn't help myself. How many donuts do you eat a week?
I eat about one donut a week. And sometimes I might come back and have like 4 donuts in like 1 month. That may have not all happened in 1 week. It just depends on what donuts that we have. Like we have out in our cases.
Yeah, I would imagine, for me anyways, I would certainly have to have some sort of governor on that intake, because it would be hard to not keep eating them.
Well, it's actually funny how many calories are in a donut, and there's a perception of donut versus other foods that health versus not so healthy. And if you look at a donut, original glaze is only 190 calories, and compare that to bagels or compare that to other breads and things like that you may consume for breakfast.
190 calories. Okay, I might not need to take that sound bite and make a GIF bite out of that and share it with my wife. Say, look, it's only 190 calories. It's not that big a deal.
That's right.
So, Kelley, with all the different channels available to you in Krispy Kreme, what's your favorite, and which ones do you think really works the best for you?
Oh, wow. It's kind of like all my babies. I would say my favorite channel, though, I have loved the opportunity with Instagram with our brand, because we are such a sensory-based company. And because of if you look at it, people basically want to see a stream of food porn, and Instagram's like right where we should be, because imagine if you go back and, like you said, you were looking at our Instagram account. We've last year we did a compilation of all of our top posts and our top performers and all the videos. And when it came down to it, while we did so many interesting other little, videos or other things to keep Krispy Kreme top of mind, the one thing that people never got tired of and that broke through every single time was this amazing glazed photo. Just what I was describing to you about the glazed theater and the conveyor belt, seeing those donuts all in a line, that little parade, and people would salivate over it. So it's watching in almost, Instagram isn't as real time because of algorithms, and it takes time for the stories to get out there, but starting to use Instagram stories and using more things that our brand is comfortable with, and really seeing our fans across the globe, they just react so wonderfully and have so many fun things to say. And it's just, I think Instagram for us has always been great. Now, I would say which one's the most effective is Facebook for us, because of our large reach. And we're such a small footprint of a brand, but to have such a great presence is very warm and welcoming. And the fact that our fans, we can see so much of what they have to say and how they feel about our brands. And we can actually change, like if we find out like maybe something's happened at one of our shops that, it's a customer service issue that we need to take care of, we can react to it so much faster on Facebook, and we can see, and people are very open and vocal, and we can really mitigate either on Facebook and Twitter on an event day or any day and we can change the full dynamics of the day and the business through like reacting and having such strong community management on those days.
So you must have somebody watching Facebook pretty much round the clock then, because I would imagine it can be very busy.
Yes, but not necessarily round the clock, but there's like a gap maybe sometimes that you may not be, but it's the approach of being always on, but it's being close to that.
what has just recently happened with Facebook and all the pressure now that they're all under, will that impact how you approach it? Or do you think it's going to impact brands in general on their storytelling on Facebook?
I think it rises us to a challenge because we shouldn't get complacent with a platform and thinking that we need to behave the same. And I think changes in a platform, and I probably sound like I work for the platform, but I think platforms, people become so complacent, they don't change their graphics, they don't change their approach. If you see some brands or some personalities that do it well or have done it well, it takes them a long time or a mass of brands to actually make change. And I think by it changes the quality of our content, charges us to think about how do we break through better, or how do we create unique experiences or create communities. And I think it's just then you have to find and redefine what your presence is and your social strategy, and not necessarily use, I love paid, so don't get me wrong when I get ready to say this, but not use paid just as a crutch, but paid as a great amplification when you can't break through, but using the best of your owned content and creating valid content that people actually care about. I think that's what we should rise to the occasion by these changes, and creating the core essence of our brand is building communities, then really start creating more groups and communities out there. And I think it'll be a unique challenge as it keeps evolving. And I think it'll help us to even be more connected to people. So I don't see it as a struggle. I see it as a rising to the occasion.
And like everything, a channel is going to evolve with what's happening in the environment around it too. It's going to have some missteps. And I guess you just, that's humanity. That's just being human. You learn from them and then you move on. Yeah. I was looking at back here and salivating over your Instagram account, and I'm going to absolutely just have donuts tonight for dinner and nothing else. Krispy Kremes. I would say of everything I see here, 90% of your imagery looks like professional photography and photoshopped and so forth. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what it looks like. Very, very professionally done. Where do you think that balance is from between that professional, beautiful food porn shot to user generated, not perfect, light's not great, but it's telling a story? Do you guys consider that when you're putting this much content out?
Yes, we strongly do. And that's a part of our content planning. But I'll say sometimes I've had to be more of an advocate for using user-generated content, only for the fact that sometimes users on a different level or a different playing field than we are at that moment. There may be just something they're thinking of, or there's just something that's motivating them differently. So you're not necessarily seeing, maybe we have a limited time offering that's at our shops. You may not be seeing that through all the feeds of following our hashtags or their conversations, but then it's kind of like, all right, well, now it's time. A lot of people might be thinking about creating wedding cakes, for instance. Like we'll have nonstop wedding cakes or bouquets of donuts or things like that. And that may not be at the right time that we're talking about Halloween donuts, for instance. So it's kind of like, well, we're going to have a balance of, while we're getting a Halloween message across and that's what's relevant, it's okay to pivot and it's okay to change and shift and to talk about, again, occasions and weddings and things like that. So sometimes it's like if you're on a message path or you have clear objectives in a campaign, it's just encouraging more people around you that the reason you might be sharing a cat looking into a donut box is because that's what the world wants to think about right now.
Cats and donuts. I mean, come on. Talk about stacking the deck in your favor.
And it's finding a balance, though, too, because I'll say we really did a lot of great growth with sharing a lot of wonderful user-generated content, and it's very purposeful. So we make sure that we're not just regramming like per every one post that we have professionally created. We're regramming. We want to make sure we also motivate people to how to create those great posts themselves. And you'll also notice, though, as people jump around platforms, and I don't want to pick on Instagram in particular, but sometimes when people jump from Snapchat to Instagram, you start noticing a not so great of quality in the sense they're just, they're gramming just to have fun, and they may not be trying to make beautiful shots that kind of match our style. So it's helping people understand, we may not have the most beautiful, perfect photo that we're going to share, but it's okay to not have perfect. But if you see people having fun, that's what's important. Or people celebrating an occasion in a moment, that's what's fun. And telling a story to it and connecting it back.
So I'm scrolling down and I see that you've got a Santa Claus. So obviously the occasion of Christmas, skydiving, sitting in a donut with a Krispy Kreme box in his lap. Now, what could possibly go wrong with that? But that's very, very funny. Tell us your biggest fail or the one you want back, the one you tried and it just didn't quite work or turn out the way you thought it was going to?
Well, it's really funny, actually. We have a lot of people that are influencers, not as in paid influencers, but we have a lot of people that love our brand. So it was probably in my first year here at Krispy Kreme, I had someone challenge me to say, why don't we share the same donut that Kim Kardashian's having served at her wedding? And, why don't you allude to the fact that, we're at her wedding? And I said, no, that's what fans do. That's what she does. She does that just because she loves, she likes her brand. She likes to engage. And the minute I posted, I was like, I'm going to show you what's going to happen, and people aren't going to like it because it looks like it's not authentic. And since it's not coming from that person or the fan, and we're making a reference to her, it's going to fail. And so literally I said, please, let's just take it down. And so I deleted it, but it was the same donuts that she had served at her wedding, but it was just like making a indirect reference. And people are like, well, why do you try to monopolize this opportunity? Or why are you doing this? And it was a very good lesson that just because we are at something, we don't need to say we're at somebody's event and occasion. Let the people share it themselves. And then also let our fans be their fans. We don't need to try to recreate their experiences just to gain attention. And so it was one of my favorite lessons, because from that point forward, people were like, yep, she knows exactly what she's doing. And the guidance and the leadership will help you to understand that, if you have to find things that are natural to who you are and to your brand, of course you do create content that's new and different. You take people to new places, but you can't just try to unauthentically use an experience or something to sensationalize your brand. And it gets you into a whole nother area of you're going to lose trust with fans. You're not going to be creating content that people want or crave, or they're actually going to respond well. We had so many fans that just blew up so negatively to us. And I don't like the practice of hiding or deleting content, but it was just taking off so bad and so poorly, and more of like getting off the donuts and more onto people and in their personal lives. And that was the other reason why I said, we just don't need to go there.
So to recap, so Kim Kardashian actually had Krispy Kreme donuts at her wedding.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a donut that okay, so they had your donuts, and that seemed like a good idea. Well, let's let the world know that she's doing that. And your point here is don't be opportunistic, that it's cool that she has them there, and it'll be really awesome if somebody actually shares a picture and lets the world know. But we, as the supplier, don't want to come across like we're grandstanding or being opportunistic in something. Just let it happen naturally, if it's going to happen at all.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Let the story roll out on its own if it comes to that.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. Well, interesting. So what's next for Krispy Kreme? Do you have any big stories waiting in the wings that you're about ready to roll out and launch?
Well, we started really wanting to hear what our fans have to say, and they always tell us either where to open or what donuts to bring. So we had user-generated event back in, it's hard to believe it was January, and we're actually going to be rolling out the donuts in April. And it's very new to us. It's the first time we use crowdsourcing, and also really listening to people on the flavors that they love and letting them express their love. So we are of a particular flavor. We let them choose between 4 different flavors, and the one that won was lemon. And it wasn't necessarily a contest that anybody's going to win anything, but it's that this flavor is going to be introduced into our shops, and it's going to be in shops for a week. And look forward to all the fun things that we're going to do and we will use influencers, and we will talk to some of the fans that were so passionate about lemon and just taking again to a new sensory experience. And instead of, you've probably seen lemon donuts at Krispy Kreme, but they're lemon filled. This is taking the core key element of Krispy Kreme, which is our glaze, and turning that into a lemon and a flavor. And imagined, again, watching lemon donuts now go down in a parade of donuts.
A parade of donuts through a lemon waterfall. Absolutely.
That's right.
And you're only going to have them available for 1 week, and then you're going to pull them out again.
Yes.
So you're that whole sense of urgency thing, huh? Scarcity.
That's right.
Yeah, but what if they absolutely love them? Could they ultimately get folded into the entire parade of donuts?
Who knows? But I think there's a potential for that. Yes. There's not necessarily a plan at this point, but it would be great to see.
So much fun. Kelley, you have given us so much information today on Storytelling Online. Are there 1, 2, or 3 things that you would really like our listeners to take away?
Well, I think understanding first your voice and the story that your brand, or if it's you as a person, has to tell, really having that together well. And so that's where I say listen and understand who you are, evaluate who you are, and who you aspire to be. And that's that first bullet. And then secondly, your story and your storytelling can evolve and change, but make sure your voice and the story that you have to tell still has that uniqueness to who you are, and it grows with you. And I guess then, yeah, I would say those are the two key points that I have to say. And, use the unique opportunities and the evolving platforms in the best way possible to tell your story, but don't try to just jump into that evolving change on a platform, but make sure you do it right. So that's my third.
Yeah. So it all comes back to listening, doesn't it? First and foremost, listening to yourself and your heart and really understanding your voice and how you're going to go about it. Then as you were telling your story, listening to how it is being accepted and is it true to you? Are you staying consistent with that? And if not, it's okay as long as you evolve and it remains true by listening. And then third, understanding the channels and how best to use them by first listening on each channel to see how people actually communicate and storytell on them. Isn't that funny?
That's right.
I mean, here we are as storytellers. We're so often just broadcasting stories, but it all starts with listening, understanding, and having empathy for your customers if you're going to connect with them in any meaningful way.
That's right, definitely. And you have to, you have to have an audience. You have to know an audience to be able to tell a story or telling the story to yourself.
Absolutely. Well, Kelley, thank you so much for coming here today and spending your day, you're not your whole day, but this hour telling us your stories here on Business of Stories. Just awesome having you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great. I appreciate this. It's such an honor.
Oh, and I'm so glad you came up and said something at Social Media Marketing World. It was so much fun to reconnect. So next time out your way, if you're around, I'll come knocking and I'll bring some donuts.
All right. That'd be great.
Thanks, Kelley. And thank you all for listening to this edition of Business of Story. So much fun having brilliant minds like Kelley here to help you understand, help me understand. I mean, I get more out of this, I think, maybe than you all do, of how to really understand, appreciate, and tell your story. And I think my overall lesson on this show today is it all starts with listening, truly understanding where your audience is, both psychologically and physically, and how they want to interact with you and your brand, and then be honest and be authentic and have some fun. And it's okay if you go out there and make some mistakes. That's what it's all about. Just keep moving along in your authentic way. If there's any more that I can do for you, please visit me over at businessofstory.com. You know all the goods I've got there for you to help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell. And if you like what you're hearing today, share Kelley and our show with friends and family and colleagues to see how they can help find their voice and really live into their most powerful stories. So until next Sunday, when we will have another story artist here for you, have a wonderful life. And remember, the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Story on, my friends.